yeah, if we can just settle into our bodies, just sense into the physicality of our bodies and just check in, see how the body's doing. Notice that the breath is already happening. We don't need to manage it or breathe in any particular way. We can just notice that it is a natural movement of the body. The body knows what it's doing. So we've talked before about just this simple sense of I am, just this simple sense of existing, being alive, being here, right? So we can, without trying to make something happen, we can just sense into what's already happening if we just stop long enough to recognize it. So we're not trying to change anything, not trying to manage anything, not even trying to attain anything, without trying to gain something that's not already present. We can just sense into that very simple sense of just being here now, being aware that we're here. I'm not talking about special ultra-sensory awareness. We're just talking about this simple, everyday sense of consciousness, awareness. We're not trying to become anything. We can just notice that there's being already present here. We're not trying to do anything. We're also not trying to not do anything, right? If something arises, we can allow it to arise. We don't need to take a position against it. We can just notice that from somewhere, from some depth, you could say, it arises into consciousness. Maybe it's a thought, maybe it's a feeling, maybe it's a little discomfort in the body. Maybe it's some agitation from the day. We don't have to take a stand against it. This isn't opposed to anything. It's just an arising within the body. And rather than be in opposition to it, we can just take it as a pointer that it has arisen out of, you could say, the silence of our being into consciousness. And at some point, that particular thought or feeling will recede back into that same silence. So rather than something that we choose to be opposed to, we could just take it as an invitation to notice it without having to approve or disapprove, without having to change it, without even having to like or dislike it. You can just notice, yes, that is what's happening in this moment, okay? And when we're allowing this sense of being to reveal itself, we can notice that we're still breathing, We're still here. We may be thinking about something at another time and place, but it's all happening here. So again, we're not trying to change anything. We're just noticing what's present when we're not trying to make something else happen. You might even say, to use a car analogy, we've just taken the car out of gear in neutral. Maybe the car is moving, maybe it's not. But we've taken our foot off the gas, taken our foot off the pedal, the brake pedal, and we're just present. Okay. Sometimes there's a tendency of the mind wanting to check out, like feeling sleepy, and we can just notice that tendency also. Because what notices that isn't sleeping. But sometimes the mind can use that as an escape. So it's good to just be aware of that's one of the tactics of the mind, right? To check out, to avoid this simple looking into our own existence isn't of any interest to the mind. To the contrary, it's threatening to the mind. The mind enjoys its seniority, being in charge. So we can just notice that tendency too. There's the mind wanting to come in, wanting to take charge, wanting to understand. There's a great Zen saying, it's when we understand, things are just as they are. When we don't understand, things are just as they are. So it's not, but the mind wants to have that safety and security of understanding, being in control, being in charge, being the final judge and jury about what's true. So we can just see that tendency, and just come back to the simple sense of, yes, and I'm still here, I'm still alive, I still exist, I'm still present in this moment. Simple, right? So it's just a real easy practice to come back to ourselves. We're not pushing anything away, we're just allowing it to be simply because it is. It has arisen in our consciousness. So we don't need to oppose it. We can just acknowledge that it has arisen, and yet we're still here, we still exist, we still are breathing, we're still sitting in our chair. So we can just keep coming back to that simple sense of being. Yeah. So this is a useful practice in these times, because even though we may be at home a lot more than we normally are, that too can cause some stress in our lives, that sense of being able to do whatever we feel like doing with, whoever, our friends are, and going out to dinner, and that kind of interaction. For a lot of us, having that no longer be a possibility is challenging, just to be by ourselves for an extended period of time. It is a bit of a forced retreat over an unknown period of time. That's one of the challenges. If we could wrap our head around, like, well, I'll just stick it out for 5 more days, but we don't have that luxury now. It's for, an indefinite period of time. We don't know how it may eventually be resolved in terms of when life will begin to look somewhat like it used to look. So that adds another element to it, because we can't imagine a specific endpoint. Another thing that's challenging is we might find ourselves in closer proximity than we've experienced in recent years with family, with our partner, with our roommate. And that can be challenging also. There's a certain balance, you could say, when we have the freedom to go out and come back and have an acceptable period of time with someone else, and then we can go and spend some alone time and back and forth. That's often how we find balance in those circumstances, especially in relationships that may be difficult to start with, say with certain family or parents or friends that may be more challenging. So we can just acknowledge that, yes, this is, in that sense, more challenging. We don't have the same freedom of choice that we may have had in previous times. But we can also even use that as a teaching. We can feel where we tend to get caught, because it adds a different dimension of stress. It is like a retreat when all of the opportunities for interaction, or most of the opportunities, are removed, and there's long periods of sitting in a quiet room with nothing happening or being in silence. It really forces us to look and not be able to walk away from whatever happens to arise then. So we can use our physical situation, even though it's not technically a retreat, there's some elements that are the same there. And we can view it as that, as really a learning experience. It's easy to say, well, the other person should be different. Right? That's a losing strategy, right? Expecting that the other person will change in order to make me happier, or be more at peace, or more at ease, or whatever. We've sort of given away our authority, right? We've handed over the leash to the other person because they're going to do what they do, as most people do, and are hanging on to the hope that somehow they'll be different at some point, or I can convince them to be different, or if I just maintain a certain attitude, they will see the light eventually. But as long as we place our peace and contentment in the other person's hands, they hold the handle end of the leash. So we've given away our authority. We've given away, we've actually given away the keys, right? The key to peace. Because that peace is never dependent on the other person. And in these circumstances where we find ourselves in closer proximity than we may be used to, it can trigger a lot of these responses where we feel like things should be different, the other person should be different, and I'm suffering because of this person's actions or attitudes, or what they said, or what they didn't say, or what they seem to have said, or what they implied, etc. So but if we recognize that it's always up to us, if we're suffering, we're misinterpreting the situation. Suffering is always a pointer. Suffering is always a pointer to looking at things in a way that is not, well, it's not true. It's not really true. It may be relatively true, you know, in a certain way of looking at things, but from a deeper perspective, it's just not true. Other people cannot make us suffer. That's the freedom, right? That's it's what Jesus talked about in terms of peace beyond all understanding. My peace isn't dependent on external circumstances, right? If it is dependent on external circumstances, then those circumstances, you know, tug me around here and there. You know, I'm at the mercy of the other person's opinion or actions or attitudes or. You know, I'm not saying that those situations are easy or that we need to, you know, somehow seek them out for our own benefit. But if we do find ourselves unavoidably in that situation, we can use that, even that, as an opportunity, even as difficult as that is, to say, you know, how exactly is that person's actions or statements or attitude, why is that generating that feeling in me, that emotional feeling? You know, what we're talking about here is obviously emotional feelings that we don't want to feel. Clearly, there are other emotional feelings that are pleasant to feel. We don't have a problem with those. But the sticky ones, the ones that generate, that stay with us, right? It's not just something that's experienced and in its impermanence just drops away as fast as it comes up. It's something that's held on to. Maybe hours later, maybe days later, we're still holding on to some event that somebody else caused some sensation in us. So that's what I mean by sticky practices. So these particular circumstances, in some ways, there's an opportunity to spend more time with ourselves in contemplation, really allowing ourselves to go deep. There can certainly be the tendency to, well, I'll just sort of distract myself for who knows how long and I'll get through this. Well, okay, you can do that. But the possibility is also there to use this unusual time of relative isolation for really extended inquiry, whether that be, you know, by meditation or reading or spending time out in nature, or just sitting and gazing out the window, or just noticing, just as we did at the beginning of this talk tonight, just, you know, what does that experience look like when I'm not trying to achieve something else? You know, if we're trying too hard to get to some other state, get to a blissful state, get to some imagined enlightenment where everything will be, you know, I'll just transcend my way out of any unpleasant experience. You know, then we're still in that trying mode. We're still trying to improve ourselves. We're still trying to make our situation better. For who? For me. So we can just see that whole game and just set it aside. Just say, okay, yeah, that's how the mind was trained. The mind was trained to achieve, to better ourselves, you know, to be, you know, seek happiness. But when we come back to just saying, okay, that's what it was trained to do, but let's just check in and see what this existence feels like when I'm not out pursuing the next goal and the next goal and the next goal, right? Or I'm not trying to think my way to peace and liberation. Or if I'm not trying to distract myself into forgetting about some difficult issue that keeps arising. So I'd encourage everybody to really use this time to really look within to see what's actually true, what's actually there, right?